Excellencies, organisers, friends and colleagues, I'd like to start with a story. Recently, I met a young man, a child survivor of torture, who is now studying psychology. He told me he wanted to understand better what had happened to him. But more than that, he wanted to share his expertise and experience with others to help them find a path to recovery. There was something quite extraordinary in his decision. Not only did it reflect resilience, but a sense of purpose. A determination not just to survive, but to make sense of suffering and to transform it into something that might help others. That is, in many ways, what brings us together today. But rehabilitation and repair are not abstract concepts. They are lived processes. They are long, complex, and deeply human. And they are made possible every day by the work of practitioners, therapists, community organisers, and organisations like yours. I am honoured to be providing the opening remarks to help shape your proceedings at this important conference, and I thank the organisers for the kind invitation. Across my career, I have had the privilege of working alongside many of you in refugee and displacement settings, in conflict zones, and in fragile contexts where the needs are overwhelming and resources are often limited. And over the past nearly 4 years, as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, I have seen those same needs reflected by survivors of torture in places of detention, prisoner of war camps, prisons, police cells, psychiatric institutions, asylum detention facilities, and juvenile residential centres. Victims and survivors are at the centre of my mandate, but too often they are not at the centre of systems designed to support them. That is something I have sought to change. One of the most important initiatives I have undertaken in this role has been the development of a Charter of Rights for victims and survivors of torture and other cruelty, which I presented to the United Nations Human Rights Council in March this year, and which I am very pleased to say received resounding approval by member states that were present, the global network of national human rights institutions, the Interparliamentary Union, and many civil society actors. Amidst a very bleak international landscape, which is marked by new and protracted armed conflicts, the resurgence of authoritarian practices, and institutional cultures that either tolerate or even incentivize torture, the Charter represents a much-needed collective effort to push back. It pushes back against what can feel like an overwhelming tide. It reminds us that even in the most difficult circumstances, there are voices insisting on dignity, accountability, and the possibility of recovery. The Survivors' Charter is a document grounded not in theory, but in lived experiences. At the heart of its development were what we called hearings for healing with survivors. These were not traditional consultations. They were carefully supported spaces where survivors, who had themselves applied to participate, could come together to speak about what had happened to them, some for the very first time, and explain what recovery and rehabilitation would mean in their lives. Each survivor was accompanied by someone they trusted, a support person, a family member, a therapist, or an NGO representative. And critically, these gatherings were made possible by the extraordinary work of host institutions, many like yours, who provided not only the physical space, but the care required to make these difficult conversations possible. This included round-the-clock psychological support, trauma-informed facilitation, and even physiotherapy, recognizing what you know so well, that mental pain is also carried in the body. These were not easy conversations. They were at times deeply confronting, but they were also profoundly powerful. Across 3 hearings in Bogota, Nairobi, and Kathmandu, we brought together 36 survivors from 42 different nationalities. They came from different regions of the world, backgrounds, generations, and experiences. Some were still living with the consequences of recent harm. Others carried the weight of torture inflicted decades ago. There were young people sitting alongside older survivors, women and men, people of different faiths, genders, ethnicities, and political beliefs. And yet, despite these differences, there was a striking consistency in what they said. They spoke about the long shadow of trauma, the way it shapes relationships, livelihoods, identity, and belonging. They spoke about stigma, isolation, and the difficulty of rebuilding their lives. But they also spoke about what they need. They asked for access to sustained, trauma-informed care, for support that goes beyond the immediate aftermath and recognizes that recovery takes time. For some, it can take a lifetime. They asked for economic opportunities, for education, employment, and the ability to live independently and with dignity. They asked for justice, but justice that does not re-traumatize. Processes that are humane, transparent, and responsive. They called for reconciliation and peace. They recognized that torture is regularly applied to an individual to subjugate not only them, but also their communities, and to instill fear. In this way, torture entrenches divisions and is a way to keep the powerful in power. And above all, they asked to be heard, not just as victims and witnesses to what has happened, but as partners in shaping what comes next. This is perhaps the most important message of the Charter. Survivors do not want to be seen only as beneficiaries of services. They want to be recognised as rights holders and as experts in their own recovery, as well as active in the recovery of their communities and countries. And we are beginning to see this shift. Across different contexts, there are growing examples of survivor leadership, survivors designing programs, advising institutions, training professionals, and supporting others through their recovery journeys. Rehabilitation designed with those who understand the realities most intimately has the highest chance of success. However, for all the progress we have made in the global framework prohibiting torture, which also makes rehabilitation a legal obligation on states, the work of recovery remains incomplete. And that is where your work is so essential. You are not only supporting individuals, you are rebuilding lives. You are restoring dignity. And in many cases, you are helping to repair the social fabric that torture seeks to destroy. The Charter is in many ways a reflection of that work. It captures what survivors have told me clearly and consistently about what is needed, and it challenges all of us across sectors to think about how we can do better. Today, I'd like to recommend the Charter to you as a basis for conversations with your co-workers and your clients, and as a basis for discussion at this conference. To think about its resonance for what you are trying to achieve, and to integrate its terms into your strategies and policies. Most importantly, to ensure that survivors are co-creators and equal partners in the work that you do. I would like to end where I began, with that young man who's now studying psychology. His story is one of many, but it is a reminder that recovery is not only about healing from the past. It is about creating the possibility of a future. And that future is something that we can build together. Thank you.